Okay, so this is going to be really serious. I see a lot of people saying that he has dementia and whatever, and like I think on one of my last talks or in Scuff Dario's chat, I think it was in the chat, I was talking about how like I understand to people how him stumbling over his words and stuff or saying things that are incorrect or not true or just even the way he talks, like his general pacing and stuff, I could see how you can make an argument for how that detracts from his electability, right? And that's that, you know, I could understand how people look at it that way. So there have been maybe 3 levels of audio quality so far. At first it was painful, but it changed to bad but manageable. Now it's changed again to actually good but maybe quiet. Okay, let's turn that up a bit then. How about that? Okay. We'll turn it down just a itty bitty bit. There we go. This should be a lot better. I'm happy that the audio could be better now. So Biden's stutter, people keep attacking it. People say that he has dementia. I agreed that like if there's any question in a voter's mind that he's not fit for office, right? Or that this dementia thing or the tripping over your words is going to hurt you as far as electability, or it's going to hurt you when you start debating later on, either against Trump or whatever. I think all of those are like reasonable takeaways to have. But then I read about how people are talking about this, and I'm realizing that there seems to be a group of people that they attack coping mechanisms that he has for a stutter, and they think that that has something to do with dementia. And I don't feel like maybe people are super well educated on the stutter or stuttering in general or what it's like to overcome that. So I thought it would be interesting to do maybe a deeper dive on that. After going through the article that I went through, I figured out that Philip DeFranco did briefly touched upon it in his news, whatever. So that's definitely something cool to check out. If you guys don't know who Philip DeFranco is, he's like a news guy on YouTube. He tries to keep it level. Some people don't like him. I think he's fine. He's a good place to start if you want stuff to read about the topic. But yeah, he picked an Atlantic article that I was in the middle of going through. So that works out well. So the more I've read into this, the more I'm coming to think the dementia claims are off the mark. I understand people care that he makes mistakes, but it's important to note those mistakes likely stem from a lifelong stutter rather than dementia. It's important to consider if it is okay to deny someone the presidency over a stutter. Is it impactful enough to cost him the election? I hope to shift the discussion and questioning to his stutter rather than his mental health, just so we're more grounded and, good faith about it. So I've linked the Philip DeFranco thing. I can post these notes for you guys after, and then you guys can go through the show notes if you want to. But yeah, let's just start going through this. So let's open up the Atlantic. And okay. And I don't even think I need the article open, but if you guys want it, I'll go ahead and link it in chat right now if you want to follow along. But I think reasonably you don't have to, because I have all the quotes in front of me. So if you guys just want to watch it on stream, that's fine. All right, and let's move this over so we can read it. Okay. There we go. I think that works. And then we'll move this start homework whatever thing. I want to edit that because we are not starting already. We are already started, guys. There we go. Okay. So let's just start going through this. So I've heard several people talking about this issue and wanted to discuss it myself. Now, I want to preface this by saying that I understand why, to the average voter, it is significant that Biden appears to be old, senile, or demented, right? Like I can understand how that, as far as the electability argument, could be a concern for you. And I think that's a reasonable thing to say. But I also want to say that if you pride yourself on being understanding, educated, or empathetic, we should do a bit more work to make sure our own beliefs and bias stays grounded, right? It is important to remember that Biden has a very serious stutter. And if you can't contextualize or empathize wholly with what that means, then this discussion is for you, right? So anyone interested in stuttering generally, or anyone who knows somebody that has a stutter, you might find benefit here, whether or not you're interested in the political part of it. Most of this discussion is going to be focused on the experience of stuttering and how that might really impact A, Biden's character, B, the way he acts in the media, and C, these like mistakes that we see. Now, what this won't do is justify those mistakes or hand wave them or say that it's wrong to focus on them. None of those things. All I want you to do is to have the context of what's going on with the stutter and what it's like to try to work against that, and to, to take that into account when you're trying to interpret like the way the dude acts. Okay. If you're not interested in that, that's fine, but I just don't think that's very good faith. So watch this and don't think about the candidate Joe Biden for a second. Think about the man. So consider a scenario in which your soul and experience were limited to Joe's. Think about what it would be like to be Joe and to grow up with what he had. And as we'll see kind of from the author's description, we'll see what that's like. And maybe you could start to understand that a little bit better. Think about how that would influence the way you speak, the habits that you have, whether it's up here or with what you're actually saying. And the fear that comes along with that. The fear of having an impediment like that and to be a public speaking person. Now, I just want to temper this because I understand we're towards the beginning of this discussion with, well, if you shouldn't be a public candidate, then, or if you're going to be a public candidate, then you should watch the stutter. Like, okay, fair enough. Or, these are handicaps that like we don't need to make a big deal about. And that, all the candidates are on a level playing field. And if this is a weakness, then it's a weakness. Okay. That's fine. This is not so much focused on the political part as it is like being empathetic and understanding and contextualizing some of the stuff that's being said about the dude. Because I'm reading stuff on Twitter and it's just like, I don't know if everybody has this perspective on it. I don't know if everybody has the context, because people that would otherwise be incredibly polite or incredibly understanding of like hardships and handicaps seem to be attacking this man for it. So after understanding his perspective, try to arrive at some sense of agreement, right? Some sense of agreement between the current media take and your own, right? Temper the opinion that you feel like you're meant to have, okay? Temper the opinion of everything you read on Reddit. Temper the opinion of wherever you're getting the news from. Temper your opinion of the people you follow on Twitter. Okay, realize that those groups and those things that you expose yourself to are like, reflections of what you want to read about. And they're not necessarily indicative of what other people think or even what the truth is or what the experience of that person is. So all I'm trying to do here is to take you guys out of that for a second. We're going to go to a different place, a place separate from the politics, and we're just going to talk about stuff. Okay. So we're going to talk about Joe Biden today. In the future, we might talk about some other stuff. But the main issue I see this week is about these dementia comments, and that is the primary focus of what I'm going to be talking about. So let's see. Temper the opinion you feel you are meant to have, whether pushed by your friends or favorite political speakers. So like, if you think you should like Biden because of Destiny, or you think you should like Bernie because of Hassan, like, that's fine. Let's try to temper those, though. Let's try to make sure that while those are effective arguments for the thing that we want, let's try to also be robust enough to understand why some other people might be coming from a different spot, or to understand maybe the facts of the situation as a whole, so that if somebody wants to talk about it at a different level, so outside of policy or outside of politics or outside of this or that, you're able to contend with that. Like, for instance, today, we're not going to be talking about this politically. We're going to be talking about this like from a health perspective. So let's keep going with this. There are innumerable ways to consider things, so having an understanding of many perspectives will benefit your general understanding of the truth. If you want to become a good artist, you don't draw all your faces head on, or you'll lack a mental image for how a face should look from the side, right? We can't draw them all like this because it looks different that way, right? You want to have enough references in your head and understanding of the form itself to create your own model up in here, right? That you can work with inside of your mind. That model would become increasingly accurate as you not only consider the basic dimensions and appearances, but eventually go further. So understanding the weight and the mechanics behind that. Understanding the actual physical mechanics of the thing itself. How does it work? How does it move? Like with your face, there are muscles and there are bones and there are all kinds of things going on. So beyond just understanding what it generally looks like at certain points of view, there's mechanics underneath it. And if you understand those mechanics and you understand how the face looks in 3 dimensions just generally, you can start to create mental images in your head that are different than what may exist presently. And you can start to create your own scenarios with that. And so that's kind of like my comparison to art. And other properties which allow you to depict the item under many conditions, right? Many conditions. That's what we want. We want a worldview that's applicable in as many conditions as possible, in as many situations as possible, while still remaining like relatable and correct. And that's a sign of a good system. Like, is it robust? Can it work in other places? Does it continue to have desirable outcomes? So when we're thinking about our logical systems or the way we view things, we should take the same approach. At least if you want to get good at argument and understanding people. And other properties which allow you to depict the item, blah, 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 outside the boundaries of what you personally have drawn or how that item has existed in reality. So we can begin to conceive things that we've never experienced. We can begin to understand maybe what somebody went through. We can kind of create things that don't exist and contend with them, like analogy or like hypotheticals, right? You start to consider weight when drawing the legs of an immense machine that consequently must sink into the ground, the properties of metal when deciding the weathering and rust on an old building, the architectural legitimacy of the load-bearing walls encasing your fantasy cathedral. Over time, you'll grow your intuitive understanding, but don't be deceived by shortcuts and tutorials on how to draw X, Y, Z. People are going to sell you these shortcuts. People are going to sell you ways of thinking that are compact, self-contained, and they work for the application that they're meant to work for. They're convincing for as long as they need to be convincing for, and they're as applicable as they need to be, right? We have a ton of these. People will tell you how to think about stuff. People will summarize all the facts for you. Just understand that that's a starting point, right? That has component pieces that you can continue to look further into. There are decisions that were made in explaining how to do something or how to think about something. There were shortcuts that were made that aren't explained to you, but they might be important. They might be skimming over details that you personally find significant. They might be completely ignoring a topic that you haven't considered in the decision, right? There may be certain aspects of the Bernie campaign that you completely fundamentally disagree with, and that might turn you off of him and you have no idea because you're not paying attention to what the policies are. Likewise, you might be supporting Biden on the electability argument, but not consider enough facts and figures to contend with the idea he might not win again in a debate against Trump. There are lots of things that we could talk about in scenarios which we could consider that will help us to understand where other people are coming from. But where does that take us? Well, it takes us away from this idea that like there's an objective thing that we can all agree on. And it takes us into this gray area where everybody's looking at the same thing, but they all have different takeaways. And while it's easy to consider our perspective at this moment in time to be the most correct or to be the most accurate or to be the most reasonable, that's not the case. And it's really tough to say that yours is going to be the right one. Because if you give me 30 years to think about a problem, I can guarantee you I'll have a very different opinion at the end of the 30 years than at the beginning. So even when I get older, I can't imagine that I'll believe all the same stuff. And so coming to terms with that and understanding that helps you to move past your current bias and to start listening to people and hearing them out more often because you've already accepted the idea that you're probably not correct right now. And that just sucks because it feels like that's the point, but it's not. It's to understand the most that you possibly can. And with more and more understanding, you'll make a decision that's more and more in line with like what you think. But the only way that you can be certain of that is to have as much information as you could possibly have. Understand different perspectives and practice that regularly so that when you come across a problem in your own life that's practical to you and is not an election, you can look at all the pieces of it and you can evaluate the best way to solve that problem. Or if there's somebody you disagree with, what's the best way I could communicate with them? How do I find common ground? How do I communicate my argument without coming off as a jerk? These are the kinds of questions that we'll solve through lessons in the class. And and they're applicable outside of politics, outside of argument, into your real life. But take the understanding into your own hands. And if you start with a tutorial, build on that. Don't just stop there. A lot of people will stop there, though. So it's something you have to contend with. Anywho, let's keep going. So we're jumping right into quotes here. Stifling laughter. The host, Steve, again, I'm going to link the article one more time for anybody that wants to see it. It's right in the chat. But I already have the quotes prepared, so we'll just be going through it. Pardon me, it's not color-coded. Again, like I said before, towards the beginning of the podcast, I really want to limit the hours that I'm putting towards this, at least in the beginning while it's not making a return. Stifling laughter. The host, Steve Hilton, narrated, as the right words struggled to make that perilous journey from Joe Biden's brain to Joe Biden's mouth, half the time he just seemed to give up with this somewhat tragic. Okay, hold on, let me read this correctly. As the right words struggled to make that perilous journey from Joe Biden's brain to Joe Biden's mouth, half the time he just seemed to give up with this somewhat tragic and limp admission of defeat. So, after reading the article, The Journalist's Experience and Biden's Responses, I found this line to be particularly cold and detached from the reality of the experience. So this has like an emotional impact on me because I feel like whoever wrote this maybe is not super well informed of what's going on or how difficult it is to try and come up with solutions to stutters. But we'll come back to this quote at the very beginning. So I'm going to make a highlight on this. So we'll come back to that. I still struggle to say my own name. When I called the gas this is a quote from the author of the article. So I still struggle to say my own name. When I called the gas company recently, the automated voice apologized for not being able to understand me. This happens a lot, so I try to say representative, but R's are tough too. When I reach a human, I'm inevitably asked whether we have a poor connection. Busy bartenders will walk away and serve someone else when I take too long to say the name of a beer. Almost every deli guy chuckles as I fail to enunciate my order, despite the fact that I've cut it down to just 6 words. Turkey, club, white roast, easy mayo. I used to just point at the items on the menu. My head will shake on a really bad stutter. People have casually asked whether I have Parkinson's. I curl my toes inside my shoes or tap my foot as a distraction to help me get out of it. A behavior that I've repeated so often, it's become a tic. Sometimes I shuffle a pen between my hands. When I was little, I used to press my palm against my forehead in an effort to force the missing word out of my brain. Back then, my older brother would imitate this motion and the accompanying sound, a dull whine, something between a cow and a sheep. A kid at baseball camp, Michael, referred to me as Stutter Boy. He'd snap his fingers and repeat it as if calling a dog, Stutter Boy, Stutter Boy. In college, I applied for a job at a coffee shop. I stuttered horribly through the interview, and the owner told me he couldn't hire me. So this is towards the beginning of this article. Why are we given this information? Well, contextually, for the whole of it, this guy finally got an interview with Joe Biden, and I think that a big part of that is because they want to discuss the stuttering, and this is a guy that stutters pretty badly, given the description, and because it was really tough to dive into Joe's experience of stuttering beyond what he had already shared publicly, this guy tries to supplement it with like some of his own experience. Now, does this mean this isn't how Joe experiences it? No. So like, as we'll kind of figure out later and unearth later, even if Joe won't admit to it, he's doing a lot of exercises to try and push that down. And he does admit to a lot of them later on at a speech he gives. But essentially, we get a taste for why is it difficult to have a stutter? Well, we're given a lot of reasons why it's difficult to have a stutter. So we're beginning to see that every interaction that you have with people, they're all going to respond to it. A stutter is something that grabs attention, and that generally we're okay with pointing out, and we're okay with people commenting on. Whereas like other illnesses or other issues or other disabilities, it's a lot more frowned upon to comment on it. But stuttering uniquely, it's not like that. So this gives us emotional context to what Biden's own background may be with this, given that I don't imagine Biden gave many quotes on the experience. So, as a writer, and to establish that emotional context with the audience, the author included this backstory throughout. So throughout the whole narrative, we're going to, while we're getting outside info from the author about Joe Biden, from other interactions that he's had with the press, we also get the author's input on like what life was like for him with a stutter. So the cultural perception of stutterers is that they're fearful, anxious people, or simply dumb, and that stuttering is the result. So stuttering is the result of these other human failings, right? So stuttering is the result of being fearful, of being anxious of people, of maybe just being dumb. And all these things are things that are under the hood, and then the result that we're seeing is stuttering. And that's how most people view it. But it doesn't work like that, as he says. Let's say you're in the 4th grade and you have to stand up and recite state capitals. You know that Juneau is the capital of Alaska, but you also know that you almost always block on the J sound. What is he talking about with block? Block is where we have a struggle and where a stutter starts. You become intensely anxious, not because you don't know the answer, but because you do know the answer and you know you're going to stutter on it, right? So if we're talking about this anxiety, where's the anxiety coming from? Is it that we have an anxious person and that anxious person is maybe dumb and that's why they have a stutter, or that merely because they're anxious they have the stutter? No. The stutter is something that happens first. For some people, they're bullied into having a stutter, but stuttering is something that happens first. And it's when you know that you have that stutter, when you know you have that hang up, that you start becoming anxious and socially anxious, because you know that there are consequences for you socially if you start to stutter, right? Because people are okay with you making fun of people that stutter. And as we'll see throughout the article, these comments really hurt. Stuttering can feel like a series of betrayals. Your body betrays you when it refuses to work in concert with your brain to produce smooth speech. Your brain betrays you when it fails to recall the solutions you practiced after school with the speech therapist, allegedly in private, later learning that your mom was on the other side of a mirror, watching in the dark like a detective. If you're a lucky stutterer, you have friends and family who build you back up, but sometimes your protectors betray you too. So, yeah. So stuttering. Did we ever think it was, this problematic for people or this troublesome? Maybe not. Or maybe like we had some inkling of an idea that this was a difficult thing for people to deal with. But I would say it wasn't until like actively thinking about it and thinking about it at the level that Joe Biden has likely had to go through it, that I started to empathize with it a lot more. And we'll keep going through this. Now, there are some structural asides that I want to talk about the actual writing here, because some of you guys are interested in hearing my take on that, given I'm an essay writer. So this writer's really cool. Let's look at what he does in this second paragraph here. Stuttering can feel like a series of betrayals. So he opens with this topic sentence that sets what we're going to be going through for the whole paragraph, right? But not only that, he takes that and he breaks it down into component parts. Stuttering can feel like a series of betrayals. Our whole paragraph is going to be about the series of betrayals. Now, what is that? Your body betrays you when it refuses to work in concert with your brain to produce smooth speech. Your brain betrays you when it fails to recall the solutions you practice after school, blah, blah, blah. And if you're a lucky stutterer, blah, 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 but your protectors betray you too. So like, it's the repeat of betrayal that makes betrayal sink more with you as a reader. And because we established it from the get-go in a very short topic sentence, followed by repetition, it emphasizes it more. It's like having a list. And it's really effective because we started that list with that topic sentence. We also have a similar structure here. So the cultural perception of stutterers is that they're fearful, anxious people, or simply dumb, and that stuttering is the result. And then we break that down more, right? But it doesn't work like that. We have that very quick little sentence immediately after that'll read very quickly to disregard that. That's not the case. It's not how it is. Let's say you're in the, and then that let's say, we're starting to transition away from that. And I don't know, I think that's particularly well written, but And that's on that. Moving on. For most stutterers, reading out loud summons peak dread. So reading out loud summons peak dread. A chunk of text that may take a fluent person roughly a minute to read could take a stutterer 5 or 10 times as long. 4 kids away, 3 kids away, your shoulders tighten, 2 away. The back of your neck catches fire, 1 away. Then it happens, and the room fills with secondhand embarrassment. Someone breathes a heavy sigh. Someone else laughs. At least one kid mimics your stutter while you're actively stuttering. You never talk about it. At night, you stare at the ceiling above your head, reliving it. So he's trying to, this is obviously the author's personal experience, right? But there's a feeling here that we will see mirrored in Joe later. And the reason why this is effective and why he does this is because when later on we're exposed to Joe's own description of events, you got to keep in mind, Joe Biden's running for fucking president, right? So he has to keep an affront, or he has to keep a front, right? He has to appear that, this probably isn't as bad as it is, whatever for him. But as we'll find out, that was not the case. Joe Biden has a very, 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 very bad stutter, and he has since he was very, very, very young. And that's not only has that obviously affected his ability to be a public speaker and in the mess ups that we see, but that also has a lot to do with his kind of fiery attitude. So I don't know if you guys have picked this up, but today, I think he got in a fight with some worker about gun rights, and he was real fiery with that dude. And I think it's surprising to a lot of people who haven't followed anything about Biden. But again, I think a lot of the Bernie bro people are detached from what people see in Joe. Joe is the good guy. Joe is the uncle, the good uncle. Joe is he stands up to bullies and whatnot. And he calls people out when they're full of it or when he thinks they're full of it. Now, granted, you can say what you can say about that or about the kind of person that does that. But that's what some people really like in Joe Biden, okay? So when you attack him for that, you're not going to dissuade the people that are currently voting for him. You may dissuade some people who are on the fence, but the people who defend him kind of understand where that's coming from. He had to stick up for himself because he was bullied all throughout school, right? Every single day. And he had a super duper bad stutter. So even teachers and stuff made fun of him. So imagine that. Now he was physically gifted, right? And he leaned into that really heavy later on. And so, yeah, he fought people. He learned how to beat the shit out of people. And he, that I think that's a big part of his character. He's a military guy. Come on. I feel like we forget these things about him that obviously play into the character that he is. And I think it's the people that are not interested at all in his campaign or his candidacy that seem to be blind to all that. And they seem to forget maybe why people enjoy him or why people like him or the positive aspects of him. Or maybe even if these are bad aspects, where do they come from? That's important to know. That's important to discuss because maybe that gets us farther than the surface level of issues that we're talking about. But the only way that you get there is by empathizing with Joe and figuring out where is he coming from? Why is he like this? Right? And if you're so against him and adamantly against him that you don't want to engage with it or learn about it, then get out of here. I don't know what you're doing. Let's go ahead and check this out. I think it's this one. No, that one's already done. Okay, we're on this one. So basically we went through this, and then the way that this author is able to really put us into the anxiety that stutterers face here is good. They're trying to get us to understand the dread associated with this issue and the kinds of hurdles these people are overcoming internally. The result to us on the outside is anxiety and a slow approach to things. The reality is, however, that there is a very real battle with a predictable and punishing foe. And that's all happening inside, right? That's all happening up here. So what you see outside is the stuttering, is the anxiety, and is the tics to try to make it not happen. But you're interpreting that all as this person is dumb or this person has some kind of major failing. And they know that. They know that you think that. And it's obvious to them the way that people interact with them their entire life. And so that's a tough thing to grow up with. You can understand how that's going to change the way that someone views talking to people, right? Or interacting in general. And how many things have to be going on up here to keep that down. If you're trying to suppress a tic like that or suppress something like a stutter, that takes a lot of mental energy and effort to do. And sometimes that's physical energy and effort too. Like we talk about the toes curling or the pushing on the forehead, whatever they're able to come up with that they feel like can get them maybe half a second less of stuttering or could stop it maybe a handful of times a day. They're going to take that. And I think it's because they're so afraid of how they might be interpreted by leaning into the stutter and actually stuttering that they'll even look that way to get out of it. They'll even put themselves through a bunch of physical pain so that it doesn't come out. And some of the people that we'll talk about later feel like that it's an inconvenience. Things like when you're struggling to get the last word out and somebody undercuts you by giving you the word. You might think that's helpful, but what does that look like to that person? The way Joe talks about it later is he felt like when parents would jump in and they would try to give him the last word or complete a sentence for him, it almost feels like, oh, I'm taking too much of your time, that it's like, that it's such an inconvenience that you would rather get this done as quickly as possible and you're not even going to wait for me to finish and that you'll cut in with it. The reality is that you probably want to help and you think you're helping by doing it. So I don't sweat people for that. But isn't that interesting to consider that perspective, that maybe that person feels like you're taking agency away from them or that you're signaling to them that like this inefficiency, which you are underscoring by correcting it, is something that is inconvenient, right? Or if you do this frequently enough, or if this ever happens to a person when somebody has a little bit of negativity in their tone, they can hold on to that. And for the rest of their life, that's how they start thinking about it. And I'm not saying that's that's what you want to happen, or that's their fault or whatever, but we have to keep that in mind. As an aside, I think it's super unfortunate that the measures Biden has been taking to mask his stutter result in his train of thought looking jumbled and unfocused. What does that mean? Well, we'll get to that in a sec. I think at the very least, the article should make it easy for you guys to empathize, if not with Joe Biden, then with stutterers in general, right? So let's go through what I'm talking about. Anger, rage, humiliation, he says. His speech becomes staccato. So in the quotes is going to be Biden, and then the in-betweens are going to be the author. Anger, rage, humiliation, he says. His speech becomes staccato. A feeling of, like I'm sure you've experienced, it just drops out of your chest, just like you feel a void. He lifts his hands up to his face like he did on the debate stage in July to guide the V sound out of his mouth. Void, right? So when we're doing things like that, when we have these tics that are meant to push down and suppress that stutter, they don't come off super well to other people. And again, if you want to argue that having those tics makes Joe Biden less of an electable official or less effective in debate against Trump later on or something like that, those are reasonable takeaways for you to have. But don't focus on the stutter being a sign of dementia or something like that. Or don't focus on the stutter being the disqualification, because it's not. It's the nature, the tics that he uses to suppress the stutter, or it's the effectiveness of the tic publicly, right? And so making that little bit of a distinction is important. By all accounts, Biden was both popular and a strong athlete in high school. He was class president at Arkmere Academy in Claymont, Delaware. His nickname was Dash, not a reference to his speed on the football field, but rather another way to mock his stutter. It was like Morse code, ... dash, 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 Biden says, even though by that time I started to overcome it. So, we're starting to get into the bullying thing, right? Like, his nickname in high school was Dash, and he was popular and a strong athlete, right? He had these things going for him, but they still made fun of him for the stutter because it was bad, right? Now, as we'll get into later too, they didn't really understand where stutters come from back then. Joe Biden's old as fuck. He was born like, I think it was like shortly after Pearl Harbor or something. The man's old. Back then, stutters, we thought that had something to do with like low intelligence, or you had some kind of problem with you, and that's simply like a symptom of that, of an underlying issue, or of lower intelligence, or some kind of problem. So you have to keep in mind that like the whole time Biden grew up, that's the context behind stuttering. And if you have a severe stutter, that's what people think of you. And so although he was popular, although he's a strong athlete, although he probably had some kind of privilege behind his life, whatever, he definitely had to overcome this. And it's definitely something that I would say he still has not overcome, as evidenced by everybody's response to his blunders, right? And their lack of understanding about what he's actually trying to do there. Bill Bowden had the locker next to Biden's at Arkmere. I called Bowden recently. It was just kind of a funny thing, he told me. Hopefully he wasn't hurt by it. Bob Markle, another high school buddy of Biden's, went a little further when we spoke. Hey, Joe Biden. That's how he'd be addressed. So even the dude's friends like roasted him for it. And though they thought maybe it was a funny thing, or that like it didn't affect him, we'll see from how he talks later that it definitely did. And this is an everyday thing. Markle said the Arkmere guys called him Stutterhead, or Hey Stut for short. He fears that he himself may have made fun of Biden once or twice. I never remember him being offended. He probably was, Markle said. I think one of his coping mechanisms was to not show it. This is an opinion that is echoed by the reporter in the article, basically, too, is that Biden seems to not want to discuss this. This would also explain why he's so hesitant to do like the speaking engagements and whatever in the interviews. Because if somebody were to decide to like make this a point with him and to attack him about this, it wouldn't be something that would be easy for him to do. After trying and failing at speech therapy in kindergarten, Biden waged a personal war on his stutter in his bedroom as a young teen. He'd hold a flashlight to his face in front of his bedroom mirror and recite Yeats and Emerson with attention to rhythm, searching for that elusive control. He still knows the lines by heart. Meek young men grow up in libraries, believing it their duty to accept the views which Cicero, which Locke, which Bacon have forgiven, forgetful that Cicero, Locke, and Bacon were only young men in libraries when they wrote these books. Biden performs the passage for me with total fluency, knowing where and when to pause, knowing how many words he can say before needing a breath. This is what stutterers learn to do. Reclaim control of their airflow. Think in full phrases, not individual words. I asked Biden what his moment of dread used to be in that essay. So I think the most important part of this is what stutterers learn to do. Reclaim control of their airflow. Think in full phrases, not individual words. So when Biden comes up on a word that he struggles with, we'll get to that in a sec, actually. Wait, here it is. Eric S. Jackson, an assistant professor of communicative sciences and disorders at NYU, told me he believes that Biden's eye movements, the blinks, the downward glances, are part of his ongoing efforts to manage his stutter. He wishes Biden would be more transparent about his intermittent disfluency. Running for president is essentially the biggest stage in the world. For him to come out and say, I still stutter and it's fine, would be amazing. Would be an amazing, empowering message. And this is something that I'd echo because, after getting to understand the experience of the author, Biden, my own family, I really feel it's important for clips like this and speeches like this to be done. And the speech that I'm talking about is going to be a speech that Biden gives on the very topic of stuttering. So let's kind of talk about this. The blinks, the downward glances, whatever. On top of the blinks and the downward glances that he does, the weird stuff with his eyes, he does it with like how he's picking what he's going to say too. So if he knows he's going to struggle on a word or he feels the stutter coming up, he'll switch what he's trying to say. But this is more difficult for people with the stutter. So if we get to the point in the sentence where we feel like we're going to stutter and we're publicly speaking, we know we have to change the word, we can't just change the individual word. We have to change it like by phrase, because we have to make sure that we can continue to say the whole thing, or we might get tripped up in another two or three words. So he has to think in whole chunks like that. And those aren't always going to like make sense, because if you stop in the middle of a sentence and then you replace like the last clause, it can make no sense, right? It's not going to sound super fluent. And that disfluency that we're talking about, or intermittent disfluency, could easily explain the issues that he's undergoing. But he won't say that, because I think the stuttering thing is something that Trump could attack him on later, or that the other candidates very well could have, although I think it's less likely. Now, I don't think that's an effective strategy. So if you want to criticize Biden for that, that's fine. Because, like, obviously Trump is going to attack it later. Obviously it's, public information that's there, whether he makes mention of it or not. So the fact that he seems to actively be trying to avoid it and actively avoiding situations in which the stutter is going to be a problem, I think that's more and more indicative of that being a real big issue that maybe we should talk about. But to keep that separate from the dementia thing, which is out of left field, is probably for the best. And to be wholesome about talking about the stutter, and to realize that, like, if we really wanted to help Biden, and we know that, well, we don't know yet, but in the future, if it ends up being that he's the candidate, like, there are things he could do to improve that. So he could pick tics that are less likely to have that problem. He can put more prep into like what phrases he's going to have available to him. Ultimately, this is like a really big hurdle for him, though, and it's like a personal thing that after years and years of life, he's probably the best equipped to handle. Yeah, when you are told these negative things about yourself and you start to internalize them, it can be really damaging to your mental health. I hope that the people making fun of him were simply ignorant of his problem like I was, rather than just partaking in bullying in this way. And see, there's the thing is, like, I hope the same thing. I hope that, like, the only reason people lean into it so much is because they don't know. But the issue is that we're very quick to put people in positions where they can be bullied. Like, if you're just striking matches and throwing them all over the place, and then you apologize when that match lands on like a garbage fire and creates like a big mess, like, that's fine. You didn't intend for that match to land on a garbage, heap or whatever. But I think we have to stop tossing matches. Like, we got to stop doing crazy stuff like this. So we got to stop saying that people have dementia, or we have to stop like randomly criticizing people for stuff we don't understand, or and it's not just all the individual audience people, right? Like, whoever comes on this stream, I hope I can educate them with stuff, but like, it's the issue comes from like other influencers and stuff too, who give a ton of weight to what happens on Twitter and become unintentional mouthpieces for like positions that people don't really have. Right. So like, if we post something super hyperbolic on Twitter that, like, if you really questioned us, like, in like an interrogation room for 8 hours, we'll be like, no, dude, I obviously don't believe this. It was a fucking joke. But like, you can't do that to everybody. You can't put them in the interrogation room and figure out that it's a joke. And some people are so prideful that they just won't even admit it, or they'll keep playing into that character. And other people don't see that, and they don't see through it. And so like, the problem is we like slowly radicalize people like that, but it doesn't even happen super well. I think the biggest issue is when you give a bunch of weight to those tweets and stuff, and you're looking at them and discussing them as if they were real like opinions that people have, or like the best version of the take that they have. Then the people opposite of you, in this case, like the Republicans and stuff, they'll look at that and they'll go like, look at what they're talking about, these stupid tweets that make no freaking sense. Because like, if we're talking about everything on a spectrum, and like, you're like over here to the left a bit, and then those tweets are like over here, so they're like almost off the screen. Now, people on the right that are moderate are like over here. So they're not seeing your position right here, because you're not discussing your position right here. You're discussing this way over here, and you're trying to like temper in the middle to where you're at. But even in the middle, where between you guys, is way farther than what you actually believe, and way farther than what the right people can engage with at all. You should be trying to focus on something that's in the middle here, in between you two, so that you can work on agreement. And whether that's moving him slowly over here, or even maybe you moving slowly over here, We have to start closer to each other if we want to come to agreement. So discussing the most hyperbolic takes or jokes or tweets like that and giving them all kinds of significance, either because they had a ton of likes or a ton of retweets or a ton of comments or engagement or whatever, like we don't think about the platform. Like the nature of the platform is to have engagement and to have those interactions. And so we're going to create tweets that are going to do that for us. And we're going to retweet things based on that as the goal. B, that's not real life, and people don't even really think that way. And that when they're put on the spot with their friends and stuff, their beliefs are a lot more moderate than their online persona may make it seem. Maybe they like have an ideology that they like, or like in an ideal world, they want something that's way further to the left or to the right of what currently is possible. Maybe that's the case, but those are fantasies. And I don't think like they have any real bearing on what's going on beyond shifting that Overton window maybe. And even that is like a really like difficult thing to prove. And so like I think it's not super effective to talk about stuff like that. We're kind of getting off of what I think I was talking about. Oh, because I read your thing and responded to it. My bad. What do you say to someone who thinks that if their intentions are good, then they can't be criticized for having negative outcomes? Like someone who would defend bullying Joe Biden to get Bernie in office. Okay, so we have to... those are going to be case by cases. So like, let me start with the first part of the sentence. What do you say to someone who thinks that if their intentions are good, then they can't be criticized for having negative outcomes? I mean, it depends on what your point is. So if your point is to make it clear to them that you shouldn't ignore the negative outcomes regardless of how good your intentions are, then that's one thing. So if you want to attack like the meta level structure of that and you want them to stop believing in things that generally fit into that paradigm, that's a different conversation. So like if you generally don't want people to approach a problem with the idea that like if it's for the greater good, I'm okay with an evil. If you want to push them away from that, that's one conversation. So you would handle that differently. If you want to, in this specific instance, talk to somebody about defending bullying Biden to get Bernie in office, we're at a very specific scenario where I can actually offer you advice. So my advice obviously is to handle this the way that I'm handling it. So like, I want to believe that it's because people either haven't empathized properly with this position or they haven't thought about it wholly, about the stutter thing. So I think that after I educate or inform someone, I can guarantee that that's no longer the issue. Then we can build off of that understanding to come to an agreement about what to do moving forward. So like if I explained all this and they had the opinion that you had at the end of it, where they're like, okay, like I could see how this is bad. And like, I definitely didn't mean to bully him, but I didn't know about this problem. Then that's easy. Like then from there we just go, yeah, well, okay, so we have to stop bullying him, right? Now, if they're still at the place that they're at the end of your message that you just sent me, where they still want to defend the bullying because it will get Bernie in office, I would say that like if they're Bernie or bust, it's one thing, right? So like if all they want is Bernie, then like that's where you have to start, is to be like, to get them to accept the idea that there could be another Democratic candidate and that it's best for them, if they want Democratic stuff pushed, to support whatever Democratic candidate the DNC chooses to advocate for. Now, if they're upset that the DNC, they think rigged everything or there's a conspiracy or whatever, I would push them towards advocacy to change that system or to write into the DNC. But nobody really wants to do that because I don't think people really believe in the conspiracy if they think about it, or they're not interested in tackling the conspiracy in any meaningful way. I think Bernie's whole campaign is about tackling things in a meaningful way and affecting change. So the fact that his supporters don't mirror that in their own decisions would be something that I would talk about or that I would harp on with them. Like, would Bernie really want you bullying Joe Biden right now? Would Bernie really think that you have to do this to win the election, or that that's what you should do to win the election? Does Bernie think that splitting the Democratic Party at this point is a smart idea? If Bernie doesn't win the nomination, wouldn't he want you to vote for Joe Biden so we can at least get a Democrat in? We already know who the Republican candidate's going to be. You already disagree entirely with him. So like, if we can get them to start making ground on the Bernie or bust thing, then we can start to lay the foundation of like, yeah, so like let's not throw mud at each other. And if we're going to throw mud, let's have it be about policy, like those memes about like he signed NAFTA and he did this and he did that, whatever. I'm way more okay with those, even if some of them are still incredibly misleading, because at least we're talking about policies and stuff. But when we're talking about things that aren't true, like that he has dementia, or we're overextending on positions that we don't need to overextend on, like you're bullying him because he has a stutter and you think that bullying him will win Biden the election, so you'll keep doing it. But like, there's other things we could do to win Biden the election. Nobody's holding a gun to your head and telling you to fucking bully Joe Biden, right? Like, there's a dozen other things you could do. And I would just work on giving you better things to do. There's better criticisms that you can make of Joe Biden. You don't even have to focus on the appearance of the stutter, like what Trump did when he was making fun of that reporter. Like, that's one way of describing what the problem is, but another way of describing the problem is I don't think Joe Biden can efficiently communicate ideas to an audience, or I worry that Joe Biden will be ineffective at arguing against Trump. Things like this, these would be helpful. And they reframe the conversation somewhere where you can start having a conversation with Biden supporters. So like, if you don't think he's going to be effective in debates, then something that I could say being a devil's advocate for Biden would be that I think Biden is good at fighting bullies. And I think he's had to fight bullies his entire life because of this specific thing that you guys are attacking him on. And I actually think it would be interesting to see a debate between Trump and Biden where Trump starts to attack the stuttering thing, right? Because if Biden has fought his entire life against people making fun of him for a stutter, I would hope that he's in a position to fight back against Trump. Two old men arguing with each other and bickering. Biden has the fieriness about him, right? He argued with that construction worker. He argued with another person. He called somebody like a dog-faced pony something, whatever. I think he has it in him to argue with Trump. Now, whether you argue that he wouldn't do that well or whatever, that's fine, because that's subjective and we're making guesses. But at least we get closer to like productive discussions about things. Sup? Oh, hey, Emily. To bring you up to speed, we're basically going through Biden in the stutter. So some people are saying that he has dementia, and I'd say that that's not entirely true. I don't think it's even close to being true. We know for sure he has a stutter, so we can just talk about that. And I didn't realize that so many people were attacking him for the tics that he has to fight the stutter. And I think what people are misinterpreting as like lapses in memory or lapses in judgment or like his brain's not working, I don't think these people are able to recognize tics to suppress stutter. So like when he starts to stutter, when he knows there's a word that's going to come up where he's going to struggle on it, oftentimes what Biden will do is he'll try to word it in a different way. But the way that people that stutter have to think about talking is in phrases, because they have to think about the entirety of how that enunciation is going to go, as well as the individual words in it and whether they can replicate that with their voice. And it's really, really difficult for them. So if you're Biden and you're in the middle of an idea or of a pre-planned sentence and you're starting to struggle on a word, you have to come up with a whole new phrase or sentence to jump to. And if you're in the middle of a sentence and you have to switch that phrase randomly, it's going to come off as really bad to the audience. You couple into that the physical tics that he has, where like he pushes on his forehead to get something out, or he does things with his eyes to do that. Like it looks weird, and I understand that it'll look weird. And to any uneducated viewer, yeah, it's going to look weird and it's going to look less, persuasive. And I think that's a fair argument. But to say that that means he has dementia, or to misinterpret a physical or verbal tic for stuttering as like, I don't know, some lapse in judgment or whatever, I think is, it dips into not being truthful. That was very helpful. Thank you. Awesome, AJ. I'm happy to help. We can continue through this. Okay. So the next thing we're going to look at is going to be a speech that Biden gave at AIS, which is, it's for people that stutter. Okay, let's open this up.
But I'd stand in front of the mirror, and I was saying this to Bruce. I used to stutter like some of you, very. Had one drawer in the bureau and a closet. It was plenty. It was and two sets of bunks. And my siblings were good. I was the oldest. That's probably why they were good. I used to stutter like some of you, very badly.
So I know he's trying to demonstrate for you what the stutter is, but that's a real stutter from Biden. So he has a really bad stutter. Okay, so I keep going back to thinking about, because prior to the stream, this is how I wrote this entire assignment, is putting myself in Biden's shoes as a kid way back when, and thinking about what it was like to maybe go through that. And it sounds tough. We'll keep going through this though.
And the thing that I hated the most was I'd contort my face when I stuttered. And I was so ashamed and so embarrassed. And I used to stand in front of the mirror, and it was Yeats and Emerson, and meek young men who grow up in libraries. And I'd go through the whole Emerson quote and try to watch my face so that I wouldn't contort it, so I could get a rhythm to try to gain control of how I spoke. Bruce, you memorized plays from the beginning. I wasn't that smart. But Bruce.
So he's talking about Bruce Willis, who also, if you didn't know, has a major stutter. And he has to work on it a lot. Now, Bruce and other people have found that, like, when you go on a stage, it can really help with your stutter. So, or if you're in a character, or when you're trying to vocalize something in a way that's not you. So if I'm trying to give a line in a movie that's a character, it's not me, it's easy to think about how that line should be said and the way that should flow. And it doesn't feel like me when I vocalize it. And so that can be easier for dealing with the stutter. And so a lot of people that stutter and try to fix it, they either go in like stage stuff or they go into public speaking, and they realize that while it's terrifying to be in front of a bunch of people, like there is, that's scary on its own, it somehow helps with their stutter. Of course, once we add like high stress and stuff, maybe that's different, but for some people that's helpful. And I'm just trying to give you more context as we go through this. Let me see. I think I have timestamps and stuff further at this point. Okay.
All admired him, and about 5 years after I left, he left the priesthood and became very involved in
So here he's talking about a friend of his that also had a stutter, I believe.
the National Stuttering Association. And I was a young senator elected at age 29. And in full disclosure, he asked me if I'd come and speak at one of the association dinners. And I made up an excuse that I couldn't do it. The truth of the matter was I was afraid to do it. Not that I'd be unable to speak, but I was afraid that if people knew I stuttered, they would have thought something was wrong with me. Because for the longest time in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, there was a lot of debate about whether or not those of us who stuttered suffered from some other problem that caused us to stutter. And like Bruce said, I too thought I was handicapped. I remember to this day how stuttering felt, how dehumanizing, how embarrassing, how much it put into question, in my own mind as well, my capabilities. Thank God I had a mother and a father.
So let's talk about that. So he's terrified to make it a point that he stutters, okay? He's terrified to make this a part of who he is, or to acknowledge that part of him publicly to everybody like that, because of the stigma it had for him in the past, right? The things that were associated with stuttering, the things that stuttering was indicative of, at least so they thought at the time. And though he acts like this isn't the case anymore, I feel like the tone of the article and my own suspicions, that Biden is very worried about the other associations made with this stutter even still. And I think that he's right in thinking that, as sad as that sounds, right? Because let's look at how people have treated those tics. He has dementia. He's like a fucked up old man. He can't think. He's senile, blah, 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 unfit, all this stuff, because he's trying to keep down a stutter. I think it would be easier on him if he would just admit that it's a stutter, and to make part of his campaign about educating people on that and like what it's like to struggle with that. Because I think this is a message that could resonate with a lot of people. A lot of people have issues with stuttering. Even more people are connected to people that have stuttering. Even more people have a brother or sister. My brother stuttered. So, the number of people you could connect with by just being upfront with that. And the positive part for your campaign would be the separation from this dementia idea, right? Like, no, I don't have dementia. I have a fucking stutter, and I've had that stutter since I was like a little boy, and it's like been the bane of my freaking existence until I got until I had somewhat of a hold on it. And even then, like, my hold on it is just like a bunch of techniques that I put in place to try to push it down. And though he's gotten good at that, it doesn't mean that he comes off as fluent all the time. And that's because technically he's not super fluent, right? He has a stutter. That's a major thing that's sitting in his way. One thing that he talks about is the movie The King's Speech. So if you guys are interested and you want more on stuttering, The King's Speech is a really good movie. And it's a movie that Biden emotionally connect with, and I think he'll discuss later. I'm going to check in on chat real quick. All these attacks on health and physical fitness when it comes to U.S. president is so fucked up to me. That's so irrelevant unless they're literally on the... No, so I disagree with that. It is important. It is 100% important. If my president had schizophrenia, I would want to know about it. If my president had dementia, I would want to know about it. I think those are 100% important parts for the office. So, no, I disagree with you wholeheartedly. These are important things, but when we mischaracterize them, or when we start bullying people, or when we're not honest about what we care about, that's the problem. So there is a whole swath of voters who you have rightly identified very much so care about physical things. They may even care about physical things that have no effect on the office. Let's put that aside right now. So there's a bunch of people that do believe in, or they give weight to physical issues or mental issues that may not affect the presidency. Okay, so we'll put those people aside. But for the people that are left, I think there are people that have questions about electability, or about the ability to debate, or about the ability to rule. And they're making those questions around, or they want to know things about the candidate that are things that will interfere with their ability to govern. Yeah, if you have schizophrenia, that I think that would impact your ability to rule compared to, a version of you that didn't have that same disability. Now, you could argue that in the future we have a schizophrenic president who has a very unique view on solving the country, or connects with people in a very unique way, and all of a sudden that's not nearly as much of an issue. I agree. In the same way that we could have somebody with a major stutter who has really good tics that you don't notice, that's able to keep that all down and you never have any idea, like some of the actors in Hollywood, right? But if that's not the case, if your stutters and your tics and everything do have an impact on the way that you come off to people, no, I think it is reasonable if you want to make that an issue for you. Do I think you should? I'm not. But do I think that it's reasonable that you could come away with that? Yeah. And I'm not going to disregard all those people who have that opinion just because I don't think they should make fun of them or focus on it. That's not fair. So I want to give that caveat. I definitely do think that there are things you could be worried about as far as physical or mental health that are 100% impactful to the presidency, or getting to the presidency, or getting your nomination. Holy shit, that segment makes him look very human and relatable. It's It's really easy to see him as human and relatable. Same with any of the candidates. A lot of them you can. Pete Buttigieg you could, even though he's the most reptilian out of all of them. I don't think anybody makes an effort to do that. I've created an argument and I've compiled evidence here to push an emotional connection to Joe Biden so we can at least get past the stuttering thing, and we can talk about that at like a level where I feel like we're all being empathetic and adults about it. But you can do this with all the candidates. For all the candidates, you can pick speeches and things that really humanize them, and they give you an insight into why people like that candidate, why they're connecting with them. How did they get so much support to the point where they are a Democratic nominee? That doesn't just happen. You can't just get up off your couch and make that happen. It takes a lot of work. And it took a lot of people to get behind somebody knowing that they're probably not even going to win that, right? Like Yang. Bunch of good ideas, a lot of strong support behind him because those people believed in what he wanted, even if they understood that the odds of him getting in were super duper small. They were basically riding on the idea that his policies would push him in, or that his policies would push him into a position with one of the other candidates, or at least in an advisory position, right? But they connected with him. They saw other stuff. And I think a lot of people have that with Biden. I think a lot of older people have that with Biden. Biden has been around for a very long time. He's had many, many opportunities to form those connections with people. There may be people that are completely tuned out of the news cycle now, but were tuned in the, the 90s or the early 2000s, and that's what they needed to know about Joe Biden. There's some people who haven't been keeping track of anything now, but kept track in 2008, and that's all they know about Joe Biden. There's a lot of people with very little or minimal information that may be holding on to things like this or emotional connections to the candidates. I think we can form these for all the candidates. Hey, excited to be a new follower of yours. Found you through your incredible conversations with Destiny. I find the work you do refreshingly insightful, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of you. Keep it up. Thanks. I hope that you stick around and have a good time. Unless the candidate is unable to perform the duties of their office, it, in my opinion, shouldn't matter what condition they are. I guess our definitions of what impedes someone in their ability to perform an office are just so impede is a very loaded word, right? Because impede, it's like we stand in between their duties. I don't think impede is the thing I want to say, because the issues I'm talking about are not necessarily impeding their ability, but they affect their ability. Okay, so like impede assumes that they're not able to get something passed that I want passed, or they are not politically effective because of X, Y, and Z, this thing is impeding them. But it could go beyond that. Not only could it impede their ability to serve the functions of the office, but it can impede their ability to get in at all. The Democratic Party is a collection of a lot of people, a lot of interests, a lot of businesses, and a lot of money to try and push a candidate that's going to be representative of all those people's interests, and we haven't even mentioned the voters, but obviously the Democratic voters as well. But I just want to focus on the organization, because at least the people that believe in the conspiracy theories could at least get down with me that the Democratic committee and like all the people on it, they have their own thing that they want, right? And they're putting a lot of money behind whoever this candidate is. So no, it is extremely important that if you have an issue, physical, mental, or otherwise, that would impede your ability to win that nomination, not even just do the duties of the office, I have to consider that, because that comes first. It's like if I had a chicken on my farm and I want to have that chicken lay a bunch of eggs so I can have a bunch more chickens. And you're saying that I can guarantee you that the embryo and the egg and everything in that chicken will be healthy. The genetics should be all good to go, whatever. And then I'm looking at it and I go, yeah, but this hen has a disease where her eggs don't form all the way, that they're all loppy. And so the chicks will never survive. And I'm sitting here telling you that if there's an issue with the development of the egg in the shell, I have to disregard the hen altogether, because it's not going to serve my purpose. Even if its chicks will be healthy later on and it can do that, it could do the job. If we don't ever get to that point because the chicks never make it because the egg has issues, then the egg has issues. If in the presentation of our thing or in the process to get there, it doesn't accomplish what we want, it may as well invalidate the entire thing. If we are not able to if the Democratic Party is not able to get their Democratic person into the presidency, it doesn't matter how well they're able to do the job, because they weren't able to get the job. Okay, so there are things that we need to have done first so that we could get into that position. And then from there, we have to talk about their political efficacy. But I think the people that are making political efficacy arguments, they're not going to have a fun time if they keep going down that route as far as Bernie and stuff. I see your point. Yeah. Although at a feels level, I do agree that these shouldn't be as big issues as we make them out to be, because there are policy issues that we could easily focus on that would be less destructive for the whole party and that would be less destructive for the voter base and for the country in general. Like, I would like to see a unified Democratic Party and a unified Republican Party that can then unify between each other and come to resolutions on like what's best for the country and to operate more efficiently. That's what I would like. And so the first step to that is getting all the Democrats to work together and to reasonably understand why each other believes stuff. Because you guys are the closest to each other to come to an understanding about stuff. That's before we even start talking about, making concessions with the Republicans. So if we can't agree, between ourselves about this, it's going to be difficult later on to do anything else. So like, just in general, at every stage, being able to agree with each other and talk about stuff and see where everybody's coming from is super duper important. Okay, let's continue with this. There are huge swaths of voters in this country that will not be easily convinced stuttering does not represent some mental handicap. There are many. Okay, yeah. So to bring us back. Sorry, my phone keeps going off. I'll mute it. So to bring us back, Biden had just talked about how, for him, the reason why he didn't want to come talk at this organization was because to admit and to make it a big deal that he stutters could have a negative impact on how he's perceived. Because when he was a kid, stuttering was associated with like, you have some kind of mental handicap, or you're dumb, or you're not bright, or there's something else going on. And that stutter is simply symptomatic of like a bigger problem. And I'm sure that hearing that enough the whole time you grow up, and even now, because as we've learned from hearing from people in chat, this is not something a bunch of people know about. So like, yeah, there are going to be a lot of people that still think this way about it. And so him just coming forward to a room full of people who understand what he's going through, he has to also consider the ramifications of everybody who might see that footage. And at that time, he had to consider, if I try to run for president, if I live long enough to go and run for president and, give this another shot, this very speech right now could be used against me. If I make a mistake right now, stuttering in front of the Stuttering Association, and that becomes viral 4 or 5 years from now, that's going to hurt me. And so he has to factor these things in when he's making a determination about, whether or not he's going to speak to other people with his condition that he wants to encourage to continue to fight and to overcome, or at least to learn how to live with and cope with and feel okay with, and that's the other thing is like, he had to fight this his entire life. This wasn't built on a foundation of pride the way that like gay stuff is today, where like we want to build stuff on pride, that like you're proud about who you are and you're okay with showing it and yada yada. He didn't come from that. He grew up with this being the worst part of Joe Biden. This is the flaw. This is probably indicative of a bigger issue. This is like, Joe is popular and he's good at sports and whatever, but he's dumb because he has a stutter, and he has to live with that his whole life. So it's tough, I can imagine. And then like, so he didn't build that on wholesome grounds, right? He built that on the grounds of like, there's something wrong with me. It's probably symptomatic of like some bigger issue that I have going on in my head. And so I have to like figure out ways of preventing that from showing to people, because every time they see it, they're going to think lesser of me. And when that is your motivation to correct that in yourself, it makes it difficult later on to try to approach that problem from a wholesome direction. And I think that this is something I saw in maybe some of the comments or in the response of the author of the article, but he was saying, or they were saying, Biden's approach in this speech was like, this is something we have to fight and overcome as if it were a disease. But for a lot of people, they think that it's just being neuroatypical, and they want you to embrace having the stutter and just understand that it's a part of you and whatever. I think that's just a first step, though. I think reasonably for most people, they accept that they have the stutter and they accept it's a part of them, and it doesn't mean that they're lesser or anything else. And then from there, they work on mitigating the negative effects of that or improving their quality of life. And usually that involves doing something to counter the stutter or to work with the stutter or to do speech therapy. All these things are so that you can live an easier life, right? Because it's hard. So even if you accept that you have this condition, it's still very difficult. And I think Biden is not coming from a place where he when he was younger, he just automatically accepted that he had the condition and then worked towards fixing it. He was told it was one of his biggest flaws and that it's probably a big problem. And so that's why he pushed it under. And those are two very different places to start at. A common theme of the talk is what he opens up with. Thank you for freeing so many of our voices, because that's what you do. Let's check that out real quick. Here, I'll pause this and respond to you real quick. Independent from how it makes him look or how much it was a calculated move on a personal level, coming forth like that is quite brave. Independent from how it makes him look or how much it was a calculated move on a personal level, coming forth like that is quite brave. Okay, see, now I read it correctly. Okay, I got you. Yeah, for sure. I 100% agree. It's brave to come forward like this. And like, even if it's like almost common knowledge that he has this anyways, it is super brave because it has lasting impacts for him. And like, at least like, if I was in his position, that's something I consider. Like, it was something I considered before I talked on Destiny. Like, when I first talked on Destiny, I was a nobody, right? Like, I don't have any online presence, and I have a decent job. I really like it. And all that could, go away if people were upset with me during the talk, or if, one or two people just, really hated my guts for some reason, decided to make my life not fun, and they had nothing better to do but harass me or whatever. Those were things I had to consider before I talked to Destiny, So the fact that Biden's entire career is built on this idea of like political and like public legitimacy, and he made that decision. Yeah, I can imagine how being in his shoes, like that's a difficult choice to make. And I would have to consider a lot if I were in his shoes. Okay, let's check out the rest of this.
And my mother, every time I'd go out of the house, my mother would say, "Joey, look at me." She'd make me look her in the eye. "Look at me. Look at me. Remember, you're the smartest boy in that class."
Oh, sorry. Let me move this so you guys can see him.
Remember, Joey. Remember, nobody's better than you, Joey. Remember, Joey, you're a really good athlete. Remember, Joey, what a good person you are. Look at me, Joey. Look at me. Not a joke. Not a joke. She made me focus on things about me that I thought I really could develop. And that my stuttering, in a sense, hid those things from other people. My mom had an expression.
So that line is important, right? She made me focus on things about me that I thought I really could develop, and that my stutter, in a sense, hid those things from other people. So, okay. The stutter, in a sense, hid those things from other people. So his mom underscored all the great things about Joe, right? But at the same time, there is this caveat, and this caveat is that all of these wonderful things about Joe have to push through this filter of the stutter, and that the stutter is hiding some aspects of his character that make him great. So like the fact that he's smart, or this or that. I say the fact that he's smart because I know that there's some like issues about what he said about his education and stuff, which separate issue. But like, I really feel like this is giving us context for what he's going through. And I know that a lot of you guys, based on the based on the responses so far, kind of are getting at what I'm trying to do with this already. But I figure I'll finish it since we're near the end. She made, yeah. So hid those things from other people. Yeah, let's go through this too. Hold on. I'm getting it all set up for you guys. Just got to wait for it to go full screen, and then we're good to go. Okay.
If you can walk up to the girl you have a crush on in high school and say, see, by the way, I resent the laughter. It's one of the things I want to say to you parents who might have laughed. You know, think about it. Stuttering is the only thing people think they can laugh at. If I was standing up here talking about having a cleft palate and how I had that operated on, or had a withered arm, or I was partially paralyzed, no one would make fun of it at all. But think about it. Stuttering is the only thing that good people think it's still okay to laugh about. And those of you who are stutterers, remember how it feels. Remember how it feels. It drags you down in that empty hole in your chest. That feeling of panic you get and then anger. That's why I asked Bruce, they saw Colin Firth, he saw the King's Speech.
So that's another part I wanted to go through. So I don't know if you caught that, but he starts going through an example of like, what's a brave thing to do, or like what is courageous. And he's like, if you're able to like be that young, to not even have those systems in place to suppress your stuttering, and you start stuttering like while you're asking somebody out, and that that, and you know it's going to happen, and you feel it's going to happen in the moment, and yet you continue onward with it. And then the parents start laughing at him, or at least some do off to the side while he's doing the stutter. And so he interrupts to give that point. But this is like, at least of the few things that I've watched of him, one of the times where like, I feel that he is touching on something like at a deep emotional level for him. He's trying to connect with the audience at that level. He stops looking at the teleprompters, which are here and here. You know, let's watch that again. Let's see how he leans in and how he starts to change when he's trying to talk about the physical experience of this. Because I think, for me, my opinion is that this physical experience or the emotional experience for Joe Biden is very, very powerful, and something that like he can't help but feel when he tries to talk about it or access it, and we can see that in his face.
King's Speech did more to help us. We saw the King's stutter palate. No one would make and how laugh at. See, by the way, I resent the laughter. It's one of the things I want to say to you parents who might have laughed.
Another thing that Joe Biden does, and we saw in the video where he got upset with that automotive worker today, is the finger thing, right? So while he's trying to, in front of a whole room of people, mimic what stuttering is like for him, maybe even going back to a memory of his own and channeling that while he's doing this, somebody jumps in and makes fun of him. Of all places, here, they make fun of him. And when Joe's explaining this, he's talking about how like there is this void, an empty place with like fear. And I don't know if you've ever seen like a visualization of like what a piston looks like in a car. Like, you know how like when the piston comes up and all the gas sprays in there, and then we like compress it and we blow it up and it goes back again. So when he has this void, it's just filled with this gasoline of anger that will just combust. And then once it combusts, it's not a void anymore. It's not empty. It manifests as anger for him. And that's what this is and stuff. He gets mad when people don't tell the truth, or when people talk shit, or when people are, attacking him for the stutter. And so that's how I can tell that this is Joe being upset, right? Honestly upset, probably. So let's watch forward, knowing that these emotions are probably not pre-prepared stuff, but these are like him connecting with the audience.
Think about it. Stuttering is the only thing people think they can laugh at. If I was standing up here talking about having a cleft palate and how I had that operated on, or had a withered arm, or I was partially paralyzed, no one would make fun of it at all. But think about it. Stuttering is the only thing that good people think it's still okay to laugh about. And those of you who are stutterers, remember how it feels. Remember how it feels. It drags you down in that empty hole in your chest. That feeling of panic you get, and then anger. That's why I asked Bruce.
See, he gets there. He gets there for a bit, and you can see that, and it's pretty clear. I'm happy for anybody who hasn't really listened to him at all, because I don't really listen to him much, and who's getting maybe a different take on Biden than they had before, because I don't think everybody's exposed to positive stuff about him. For the most part, it's all negative stuff. Or the news. But I wanted to give like a wholesome take on him. So that's my wholesome take. I don't think we should make fun of his stutter. I don't think we should make fun of tics aimed at suppressing that stutter. In most of all, beyond that, I don't think we should conflate those tics with dementia or with other things. Because now we have an understanding as to what that is. What is he doing? What is he going through? And I just hope that can change the conversation around that a little bit. Now that we have somewhat of a decent understanding, at least emotionally and historically, for like what Biden's been through with this, I want to look at this. So in the article, he says, "I'm everybody's target. They have to take me down." And so what I found is, not anymore, I found that it's difficult to deal with some of the criticism based on the nature of the person directing the criticism. It's awful hard to respond the same way in a national debate, especially when you're, the guy who is characterized as the white guy of privilege kind of thing. To turn and say to someone who says, "I'm not saying you're racist, but," and know you're being set up. So I have to admit to you, I found my mind going, what the hell? How do I respond to that? Because I know she's being completely unfair. Okay, so this is talking about something else. This is a different topic. We're jumping into something else. He's talking about the difficulty of these catch you things. He addresses the issue without ever using you pronouns there. Takes the punch out of his anger, and makes it easier for the audience to not feel attacked by his criticism. I don't think he's criticizing anybody. But yeah, he's talking to a room full of people that have the same problem. So it's probably like a good thing to keep in mind. So I definitely don't. He's using ours as like to bring everybody together and whatever. But I mean, like, because he shares that same thing. I mean, he went through it too. They all have the exact same issue. Even if you're completely against Biden, I think it is important to practice exercises in empathy to become better at argument and debate. The better you get at separating the man in front of you from the argument or information they present, the more apt you will become in discussions, because you will appear more focused and mature. Can you reword that, Noah? Let's try to reword that. So I think that you have to separate the person in front of you, their lived experience, their biases, and their history from the arguments and information that they're presenting to you. That's important all the time, okay? I understand in politics those things will muddle, because part of the game is like picking a person, so the person is going to be discussed. But I think that oftentimes there are people who say they want to talk about policy or they want to talk about substantive issues, and that's not what they're doing. They're focusing on attacking the man. And attacking is different from understanding, right? So understanding someone so I could better contextualize the argument that they're giving me or the information that they're presenting me is very, very different from attacking the person that they are. and using that as a way to discredit their argument. Though this is often a two-way street where you can use something about the person to tell me something about the argument, I think that more often than not, you want to be going one way down that street, okay? Because it's like a hill. It's really fun and easy one way, and it's not the other. So we should try our best to use the other person and an understanding of their character to contextualize the information they're giving us, and maybe even to filter out some stuff that's not super relevant to the information itself. When I talk to Destiny, I have to cut through all the hyperbole and all the negative language to understand the logic behind what he's saying. I filter that out. When I'm listening to other people talk, I'm doing this all the time. I'm trying to figure out what their biases are, where they're coming from, what their background is. And if there's something funky about the way they keep reaching conclusions, like there seems to be a trend, there's something in the background of their brain that's like influencing every decision before it comes out, then I make that my focus at the very beginning. Oh, okay, there's something I don't see because the way you use data is very strange. I think there's a bias here or something. I don't know what it is. So my first thing in the argument is going to be to figure out what that is, to diagnose it, to understand you better. Because if I can understand whatever that chemical X is that's influencing your ideas before they come out of your mouth, then I can engage with that. For Biden, a stutter is definitely going to be one of those things. If I'm trying to interpret his body language or his face or his verbal tics, like there's a reason all that's there. And we pick up on it no matter what. Because we tried to assign dementia to those tics. We tried to contextualize it that way. But that's bad faith. That's attacking the man. It's not trying to understand him. It's not trying to understand where he's coming from, what he's doing, how that has any impact on the argument itself whatsoever. So let's think. Now that we know that Biden has this issue, can we start to understand maybe why he has issues when he tries to recount events? Can we understand why he has so many gaps? Why he makes mistakes? Why he misspeaks? Yeah. Now, does that mean that those things in the past weren't lies or that he didn't actually tell like something that's not the truth to benefit him? No, not at all. You'll have to do those case by case. But I think going into each of those discussions, understanding what stuttering is, what verbal tics are, what physical tics are, what suppressing that is like, and what the experience it is to live with that thing, all better enables us to interface with Biden and to understand him and to communicate with him or to understand the people that support him more most of all. What do they see in him? I think that today I tried to show you guys a different Biden than you probably see, right? This is how I portrayed him today in the context of talking about the stutter and what that experience is like and, what that means for his performance in the debates. But that's one perspective. That doesn't mean he's free of, worry. It doesn't mean the stuttering is something we should disregard or isn't relevant to the discussion or that it's not something worthy of criticism. But just to try to get us to understand that, because I don't think that people did. And I hope that this does that for people. Even if you're completely against Biden, it is important to practice exercise and empathy to become better at argument and debate. Let's then try for a moment to understand the difficulty here. From Joe's perspective, he is and has always been the target for ridicule and attack. Let me fix this. You guys aren't even reading what I'm reading. There we go. Let's try then for a moment to understand difficulty here. He is and has always been the target for ridicule and attack. When the attacks in front of you seem counter to years of work, it can seem uncharitable. When the attacks are levied on the back of a speech impediment that is not at all reflective of his beliefs, it can be hard to handle. And it's certainly unfair. If you still struggle to see where Biden is coming from emotionally on this point, the passage before it gives more context. Before collecting from customers on his paper route, Biden would pre-play conversations in his mind. Banking lines, a tactic he still sometimes uses on the campaign trail, he says. I knew the one guy loved the Phillies, and he'd ask me about them all the time. And I knew another person would ask me about my sister, so I would practice an answer. So to explain what's going on in this quote, Biden is saying that, and this is common for people with the stutter, remember that they try to think in terms of phrases. How is that phrase going to sound? How does this sound when it comes out? What are all the words in it? because if they can practice that in their head, they can try to execute that as they imagine it, rather than going word by word and increasing the odds that they hit a stutter. So he used to pre-play discussions in his head or conversations, and he would pick topics and he would make sentences that would be easier for him to say, and he tries to prepare for what they might ask. Also, he doesn't inconvenience them with the stutter. So imagine that somebody comes into a debate completely out of left field on something like this. It's difficult for you to address that. Now, that could feed the arguments that the stutter is something that is not good for Biden, and that might be a reason not to vote for him. Okay. But now we understand it's a stutter. It's not that that he has dementia, or that he's old, or that he doesn't think right, or he's not able to, whatever. So imagine needing to mentally prepare for your answer to everyone, for fear of ridicule and an uncontrollable tic that is ever present, waiting for an opportunity to trip you up and humiliate you. So he's got that all the time. He's got a little thing in his head that fucks up everything he says when it comes out. And he has to rethink a way around that every single time he says anything. Right? It's hard. So Biden carries that little bug around with him everywhere he goes. And so when he's blindsided by a bad faith claim that is built upon something he said while trying to recover from his stutter, that can be really stressful and anxiety inducing. He already said that he doesn't like attention being brought to that. So when on top of that, attention is being brought to it because he's racist, or because he's a liar, or because all these other things that aren't true, and he's not super willing to just come out and say that it's because he's trying really hard to hold down a stutter, he's in this awkward position. Now, you could argue that he should be transparent about the stutter and that would fix this. Maybe. That's a fair point. But it is the stutter. It's not that he's racist. It's not that he believes in the things he missays. Like, you have to take that with a grain of salt. And like, if you're going to make fun of him for it, make fun of him for it. Just do that in the right way. Thinking about the content beforehand is hard enough. Having to prepare the phrasing also sounds super stressful. Yeah, and imagine you have to do that on the fly, that she hits you up with something that you didn't prepare for at all. Or that you're upset. Because remember that he's talking about being upset too, and that being upset is magnified because what they're talking about is a stuttering issue that he can't talk about, or he doesn't want to talk about. So that anger level's way up here. Now that's why he snaps and stuff. I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying that's bad, but it's important to understand why that's there. Maybe it shouldn't be about dementia now. Maybe you can better understand what he's doing the next time he seems to stumble. Now that you understand him a bit more, could you be more charitable? Do you feel better equipped to understand what you're seeing with Biden? Are you willing to help guide others towards a better understanding of the situation, maybe stuttering in general? These are questions to consider and to work on. And that's kind of the takeaway from this talk. This is a bit on the actual thing that he's doing. So Biden talks all day to audiences both large and small. In addition to periodically stuttering or blocking on certain sounds, he appears to intentionally not stutter by switching to an alternative word, a technique called circumlocution. Wow, I'm going to stutter on that one, which can yield mangled syntax. I've been following practically everything he said for months now, and sometimes what is quickly characterized as a memory lapse is indeed a stutter. This is one of the people, one of the experts in the article talking about in analyzing what's going on. So yeah, it's definitely a cover for the stutter, and it's not that he has dementia. It's not that he's wrong. It's not that he's intentionally trying to lie. I don't think a lot of these things that are being attributed to malice are not great. Hi, I'm here. Hey, what's up? You just missed out on a really, really, I feel like, intense talk about Biden, but you could catch it later. I think I'll cut it and post it to the YouTube too. Hi, here, I'm Dad. Progressive Dems making fun of an uncontrollable tic from Biden and Pete's homosexuality is ironic. See, again, we're way overstating. So I don't want to agree with a take like that, right? Because as I've talked with Himalayan and somebody else about prior to this, while we were going through this, it could very well be that people don't understand this. And if people do understand it, it could very well be that they haven't empathized with it, which is a whole nother step, right? Like, we can understand that, like, the experience of being poor and the statistics and whatever, but then we can try and empathize with that experience. These are two different levels. Like, I can understand that so-and-so percentages of people in the United States are X, Y, Z, and that things are like this, this, and this. But sitting there and trying to emotionally connect with somebody and feel what they're feeling and to go through it in the most charitable way possible, that's a very different level. So I think most people have not done the first level. Most people do not know about stuttering. They do not know about tics. I think especially on the Democratic side, or they're being super short-sighted about that. But I think like, there's a lot of people that are in that category. But, if there's a lot of people in that first category, how few people actually try to empathize with Biden or his supporters or to figure out why people like him? Even fewer. And this is this level is already so low of people that just know how stuttering works, how tics work, or are willing to look into it because they should know that Biden has this. You figure it out very quickly. And in most, like, neutral places, it explains that that's where these tics are coming from. And so you very quickly can go down the rabbit hole trying to understand stuttering. But if you are not coming at this charitably and you don't want to understand it, and this is not built into the way that you research things, you're going to fall flat every single time. I don't think people normally have systems like this, and I don't expect you to. So part of these streams are going to be showing you how do I try to get informed about this. I don't know a ton about these candidates. How do I try to understand where these people are coming from? This is how I do it. You have to understand the facts and stuff, sure, but you have to empathize. You have to contextualize that emotionally at a human level. What does that mean? How are people going to take that? What does that feel like? I wonder what it's like to be that dude. How is that going to influence the decisions he makes? As a president, he's going to be using his character, his lessons in life, and his general persona to push him through all the decisions he has to make. It's difficult to understand what he's going to do in every single circumstance or with every single issue. But if we can understand him as a man and we can understand his history, we may have a better idea of what he's going to do as a president than if we look at purely his policy and stuff. And that's the opinion of some people. So for some people, they only care about the man. They don't care about the policies. Or they care very, very little about it compared to who the dude is and what his character is like. Over time, what is his record on stuff? What kind of man is he? They care about that. For people that care about that, I think Biden could very easily be their pick, because I can very easily pull up things about Biden and feel like a human connection to Biden, right? So understand that that's where some people are coming from. Now that we have all this context, let's see. I'm going to go through the chat real quick, okay? Circumlocution. Oh, okay, that's the name of the thing. That's true, I agree. Okay, yeah. Yeah, and so all of this is about tempering an opinion. When I say tempering an opinion, it's a lot like when you're, like, folding your steel on your katana or whatever, if you want to think about it like that. We're making it stronger every time we do it, every time we're, like, running it up against other things. So one of the things I would say, at least with your comment in particular, Revolution, would be, not thinking that they're just, like, purposely making fun. I mean, they're bullying him no matter what. They have that effect on him, right? But do they go out there knowing the impact of that, or, like, with that on their conscious when they do it? I don't think they do. It's not like actually physically beating the shit out of somebody where you're confronted with, like, the mess that you're making as you're doing it. When people send things online or when they tweet or when they do these things, it's very passive. They don't at all intend for the effects that it has. They don't intend at all that it's taken the way it is by outside audiences who don't have context to the discussion. And that's why I say that we shouldn't give so much weight to what's on Twitter. In the same way that we don't discuss, like, the names of shooters and stuff, I don't think we should be giving so much weight and airtime to things that are going on Twitter or individual tweets, because it's like that's not what they were meant for. When people sent those out, they have a whole different set of, like, reasons why they're doing that, right? They want interactions. They want engagement on that. Maybe they want to push their brand. Maybe they have to be super hyperbolic because their fan base is super about one candidate, or their fan base is all jumping in on bullying somebody and they're weak enough to join in. there's a lot of reasons we could look at as to why people do that. So I don't want to just say that they're actively trying to bully this dude, or that they're not thinking, or that they're irrational, or all these things. Like, I see a gap in consideration that I just hope to uniquely fill. And by giving this information to other people, I hope you guys can uniquely fill that in. You guys go in other streamers' chats. You guys talk to other chatters. You guys have the time to be in chat. So you meet people in your real life that might have similar takes. Or even better, you meet people in your life who are very uninformed about this stuff, or don't have too much of an interest in it. And so when they give you, like, in passing, a bad take, way easier to correct that with somebody who's not invested than with people online who are super invested, right? So these are the kinds of influences you can really have on your life too if you haven't considered them. And you can have those if I give you this information, then you go and you hear somebody making fun of Biden for being a demented old man. You could be like, well, no, I don't know if you knew this, but he has like a hardcore stutter. And if they go, well, what does that have to do with it? Or they tell you like, oh, well, that's because he's old and he's demented. There's a learning opportunity. You can fucking teach him how stuttering works. No, he had that since he was a kid. And when he was a kid, yeah, they thought it was like a sign of mental illness, but we know that that's not the case anymore. And sometimes kids get stutters just because they get the shit bullied out of them, or that's just how they are. I think it mentions in the article that 2/3 of it comes from genetics. That like, it's like a 2/3 likeliness that you have somebody else that has stuttering if you have stuttering. So like, giving them all this context and in some ways making them feel bad about what they said or regretful of the way that they handled that means that they won't do that moving forward. Or the next time they do it, they'll be very well aware of what they're doing when they do it. And then they can let regret pile up. So if they don't want to change their behavior and they want to keep acting like that, let regret build up for them. But don't let them to continue to wallow in ignorance. Teach them about it. Give them some insight into it. And if you deliver it in a way that connects with them, like I tried to do emotionally with you guys today. And the reason why I picked emotion as my main way of convincing you guys today was to show another issue I see on the site, which is that people tend to not give a lot of weight to emotional arguments. But as I've just demonstrated, I made this entire argument off of like emotion and empathy, and it worked, right? It's very convincing. You can make arguments with whatever. It doesn't have to be logic. So I hope that this video, once I post it to YouTube, will also serve that function to show you that, yeah, you can make an emotional argument. And it can be an emotional argument supported by a logical framework of like facts and points and whatever, examples and quotes and rhetorical analysis, whatever. But the crux of it is emotional. I'm trying to get you to feel for this guy because I felt for him when I read this. Like, like I didn't know that it was that tough for him. And the more I read into it, the more I was like, oh, we have this totally wrong. And we have to fix this. Or at least to have the whole picture, because I didn't have the whole picture. I want to give that to everybody. So I hope that does this. That's our first structured topic. We're barely past that. Isn't it stretching it though? Every human has redeemable qualities. If you look up Biden, there's a lot of messed stuff. Yeah, there is. Yeah. And if you use those other messed up things to choose not to like him or to think he's a bad man or to not like his politics, 100%, I think you have you can do that. Yeah. And I think it would be smart of you to do that because that's what I expect everybody to do. Go off the info you have. But it sounds like that some people have a bunch of bad information about Biden and that's why they think he's bad. All of that I'm saying is that if you have that small set biased information, yet there are a ton of people out there, more than half of the party that seems to support Biden, consider it, like I wouldn't stay too, like there are other things you have to use to temper your opinions on things. Tempering your opinion, making it better, running it against other things, making it stronger. So like, if from your perspective, you can't even fathom how people like Biden and there's all these bad things about him and blah, blah, blah. Look into it. If there's over half of the population of the Democrats that like him or half of the voters, whatever, I don't know. look into it. He's one of the top candidates. Why is that? Why do people like him? How are they able to see past these errors that you see? Or maybe it ends up being that people don't have access to the errors that you see, and it's just a matter of showing them. But I wouldn't make that assumption right off the bat, because usually you're wrong. I'd say 80% of the time when I think that I'm wrong, most of the time it ends up being that there's other information that I don't have access to. And when I hear other people explain to me why they believe something, whether I agreed with their points or whether I saw a general conclusion that I could come away with, like a way that I can reword what they're saying and agree with it, it tempers my opinion. Now I'm less radical. Now I'm like, next time I encounter somebody that's like this, either I could push them into my description of why I think you could support him, and then if they fall into that, check, okay, that's reasonable, and that's being good faith. That's not everybody argues, not everybody thinks logically, and so I'm trying to come up with solutions that are logical as far as why you would like this guy or why you would not like him. And then I'm running that against what people are saying and seeing if that's correct. And when I see that we have an alignment between those, now I have that extra dimension. Like, okay, I understand why people like Biden. It's probably because of this, and this. And then if I understand why people don't like him, which I already do a lot of because a lot of the internet doesn't, then I have all those. And I can temper them together and have a way better understanding of everything. So yeah, if every human has redeeming, yeah, they do. They have redeeming qualities. I don't think the stutter is a redeeming quality necessarily. I think most of what I was getting at in the discussion about Biden is to change the way we're talking about the stutter, or to change the way we're talking about the way that he speaks in speeches, because I don't think we have the context of the stutter and we're not giving it enough weight, because I really think that's the biggest influence on a lot of what we see. So pretending like he's purposely lying, or pretending like he's stumbling over his words and he's dumb and he's senile or whatever. These are all not true. These are all not getting at the truth of the matter, and they're not getting us any closer to picking a better candidate. Anywho, on to Rogan and Dunning, unless you guys have any last questions, because I know that was a big section. So if there are questions, I definitely understand.